I'm Jill Rowe, and in this episode of the Different Podcast, Steve Chalke and I talk about why lament really matters, especially when we are surrounded on every side by seeming chaos and the 24-hour news cycle. We chat about how to find our way when things seem out of control, and we think about discovering a healthy practice of lament through which we can help and support one another as we go through disruption. We realise that lament is a sacred and holy act. So instead of despising it, see that we can grow through it and find the courage we need to help create a better and more generous world. It felt like this conversation really mattered. Hey, Steve Chalke, it's been a while.
It's been a long while, Jill.
No.
Because you've not been very well.
No, I haven't. 3 weeks in hospital, 2 operations, woohoo! But I'm back.
You're back with a bounce.
I'm back with a bounce. It's good to be here with you again.
So you wrote down we should talk about lament.
I did, yeah.
And I guess you've had a lot of time to think about it.
Yeah, it's been quite an adventure. But anyway, no, I was thinking, you put the news on, I was just looking at the BBC News app, and there's just so much, isn't there, at the moment, where you just feel it's just broken and feels like lament might be missing from our experience.
Or lament might be unavoidable. That's the other thing, isn't it? Because it's just so fast and furious the whole time. I was thinking about this just earlier today or yesterday, can't quite remember. Well, I'll tell you what it was. I read that it was in 2007, June 2007, that the first iPhone went on the market. And then in 2010, they produced the first ever smartphone, because not just a mobile phone, it's a smartphone with a front-facing camera where you could take pictures of yourself and keep, editing them and send them to people. And I was just thinking about how that changed everything about life, because it became fast and furious in the first instance. News was now 24-hour. You couldn't turn it off, or you could turn it off, but you constantly being told about what was going on. Whereas when I was growing up, I guess when you were growing up, you had to actually switch on the radio.
Or
and
the
intentionally listen to the news.
Yeah. At a certain time.
At a certain time, because the news was on at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock and it was on in the morning.
Yeah.
But that's how we digested news, from the radio and then the radio and television.
Yeah.
But now, in your little mobile computer that we still for some reason call a phone, this kind of communication center that puts you in touch with the whole world, the news and the disasters coming flooding in. There's wars and there's shootings and there's famines and there's the ecological disaster happening around us, climate change, and the gap between the poor and the rich is forever getting wider, and people are being shot here, and there's, a giant court case here, and the government's in disarray, and then you're supposed to be happy. And that's all by lunchtime.
Yeah.
And there's the impotence of it as well, isn't it? It's kind of like,
So what do we...
All you can do is lament.
Yeah, and make time for that. Some people even switch off, right? Some people just choose not to listen to any of
It's
them.
very hard to switch off, isn't it? In fact, the reason I was thinking about all of this, and the reason I mentioned the front-facing camera, is because that led to adolescents being fixated about what they looked like. And that led to a new level of angst and lament and pain, because it's all about looking good. And then, they introduced on Instagram the like button. And then everybody's got to be liked. And the worst thing in the world is to be not liked and publicly shamed. So our whole world becomes chaotic. And whether it's lament and pain because of what's happening in the Middle East or Ukraine or what's just happened in Australia as we record this, killings in Australia, or it's just that I'm not liked and I've been left out and that party happened and I wasn't invited. all of these things just add to the pain and chaos of life for millions of people.
I think you've got a quote from Scott Peck that you were...
Yeah, well, I was telling you about this beforehand, because Scott Peck is the guy that wrote that very famous book, The Road Less Travelled. It's just worth reading the introduction if you don't read the whole book. And the road less travelled is the road through pain and through disarray and vulnerability and loss of control, because all these things are about loss of control, aren't they? And he says this in the introduction. He says, the truth is that many of our finest moments are likely to occur when we're feeling deeply uncomfortable, unhappy, or unfulfilled. For it's only in such moments, propelled by our discomfort, that we're likely to step out of our ruts and start searching for different or truer ways, truer answers.
I like that.
I think it's true, and I'm not sure it's always true.
When do you think it's not true?
Well, it so happens, because of some of the work I do, that I know now that the number of adolescents, young teenagers ending up in emergency departments of hospitals in London. We work in some hospitals in London in the emergency departments. The number of them turning up every week on average, having attempted to end their own lives, is 200. 200 a week. So the uncomfortableness, the unhappiness for these young people didn't propel them to search for different and truer ways and answers. Sometimes we're just defeated by everything, aren't we?
And
overwhelmed.
Yeah. And maybe it's also that we need to create a healthy way of lamenting as grown-ups, because I think often we rush a notion of lament. You know, I often think of lament as a form of prayer, that there's something almost sacred, divine that's happening in that, where you haven't got the answers, it is out of your control, you don't know what's going to happen. How you do that well, how you allow yourself to go, I don't know, but I'm going to find someone that can help me get to the other side of this. I'm going to lean on my community to help me. And I think as adults sometimes we don't allow that to be our practice.
Is that in itself a question, genuine, a discipline, an art? Because when you're overwhelmed, you just feel that you're drowning in all of this stuff. I'm drowning in what's going on in the Middle East. I'm drowning at seeing those children massacred day after day. I'm drowning. I've got no air. I can't find the surface. I can't lament. I just am falling apart.
I think for me, when I think about the scale of all of those things, because it does truly feel overwhelming, doesn't it? But then I'll have a little conversation with you, and then I'll smile at a little kid in church on Sunday, and they'll smile back and pull a face, and suddenly you realise that even in the darkness, there's these little moments of light, which I think is what helps get you to the other side. And one of the things that we were talking just before this, we started recording, I think in that is this learning how to be brave and courageous when it's hard.
Yeah, confront it, sit in it, deal with it, rather than shove it away, cover it up. I do think there's that in our society. What people do, what I'm tempted sometimes to do, is if I'm feeling lonely or down, put on some music with a beat, play a great album.
Get myself up again.
Yeah, put on a film, go somewhere, do something exciting to lift things. And I may have said this before, but for me, the fact that Jesus, thinking about the work in front of him, because he knew his pathway through life meant taking on the authorities, the Roman Empire, And that was going to be a tough one. And it meant taking on the religious leaders of his own society, his own people who were putting the ordinary people down. And that was going to be a tough one. He had to really contemplate that. And then he goes into the desert, and he sits there for 40 days and fasts and ponders and struggles with it. I'm sure that those 40 days were days of him wrestling with, is this really the only way? Is this what I want to do? Is this the pathway I choose? And he didn't hurry out of the desert. That's the point. Yeah. Whereas when we're plunged in, well, I should speak of myself. When I'm plunged into a desert, a bad place, stuff goes wrong, I want to get out of that desert as fast as I can, either through entertainment or noise or making something happen, rather than sitting in it and learning from it and not despising that moment.
Yeah. I really like that he didn't rush. But he did come out of the desert, didn't he? Like there was an exit. It wasn't that he stayed in that place for the whole of the rest of his. No. And I think it's just learning, how do you get to that where you do the healthy lament so that the next phase can happen. And it's even things like, in lament, sometimes all you can do is Steve, you may, don't know how often you cry, but even in lament, and if you cry, there's a thing that the body is an incredible thing. It's in that crying that you are releasing stress hormones. There's something really in your tears. What comes out in your tears is stress hormones.
Yeah.
So there is something really healthy about that process. But you're coming through it. Yeah. You're not staying in it.
I think I cry a lot, actually. I do cry as I watch the news. Often.
You sometimes cry when you speak as well, don't you?
Yeah.
You're preaching.
Because I become overwhelmed with these things that matter so much. And I don't know what to do about them. And I wish I could change them. But I think in my makeup, and we're all different, aren't we? It's like it's grief, you know, and people used to talk about stages of grief. And of course there are stages of grief. It's just they come in a different order for different people and at different timings, and you swing backwards and forwards. I was talking to a friend of mine who I know very well, who lost his wife, and he was feeling guilty because he wasn't lamenting, grieving as much as he felt everybody expected him to. And then he felt that they were wondering of him, did he really love his wife? Which, so it was just sitting with him and just saying, it is what it is. And you are who you are. And we all deal with these things. And some of us need to sit for a very long time in lament. And others of us get a bit frustrated with people who sit for a long time in lament and want to move on. I mean, I was going to talk to you about the greatest lament of all time, in my view, but I'll get to that in a minute. A bit more serious. I was going to say, I've got to know Steve Parish, who's the owner of Palace Football Club, the greatest football club in the world. Palace. I just have to say that yesterday was a moment of triumph and not lament, but you cried as well as we beat Liverpool, ended their season and basically saved ourselves, I hope, from relegation all in one go. Whoa! There you go. But anyway, I remember talking to Steve Parish, the chair and part owner of the club, and talking to him about the fact that, I mean, what's it like, because he's the boss, and the week before we got thrashed by Man City. I mean, like properly, thrashed, broken. And what's it like when you are the guy who's responsible, and sometimes the crowds, out, and all this kind of stuff.
Placards and everything.
How do you deal with that? Yeah. And he said to me, well, the first time we played Man City, I walked round the dressing room and I thought, this is going to be a disaster. and I was depressed before it started. It's some years ago. And then he said, and then I suddenly realised, we're playing Man City. They've got to play us. I'm going to celebrate in this moment. It did turn out to be a painful one, but so
we're here.
Yeah, we are here. We are here. I heard somebody who's dying of cancer, incurable cancer, in his 40s, 46. And I heard him say that what he's done is lament, but he said, I then came to this place. I've had 46 years. Exactly. And he said, the chances of me being born again, he said, the circumstances, the evening, my mum, my dad being together on that night, nothing going wrong. I was conceived in that moment. If I had not been conceived in that moment, if it had been a day later, it wouldn't have been me at all. I wouldn't be here. I'd been given 46 years of this. I found that really moving that he thought about it.
So there's this thing, isn't there, about bravery and courage, but there's also this perspective that's built into lament.
Yeah.
There's something the other side of it, of that experience. Yeah. There was you saying a 46-year-old male, I'm just wondering if it's the same person, but there was I think it was on the radio, a guy in Jersey wrote a letter to the local newspaper, and he's dying of cancer, 46, and he wrote a letter saying, here am I, I've had 46 amazing years, I've done this, I've experienced that, I've tasted this, and it's what a beautiful life I've led. Right. And it was this just really joyful, profoundly true statement of yes, but
to see the beauty in the pain. Yeah. Might have been the same guy. I listened to somebody talking about themselves. Perhaps they got him on.
It's the same guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there we go.
And they go.
Yeah. The wonders of the radio.
Yeah. They then got him on.
And he read it out on the radio. Yeah.
I remember the first time, I'm partly Indian, as you know. My father was Indian, and I remember the first time of going to India. I had to go to speak. I was given the opportunity to go to speak, and I took it, and I had to be there for 3.5 weeks. It was traumatic. It was totally traumatic because I couldn't cope with the suffering and the pain, the pavement dwellers, people dying in front of me and everybody on the street, the huge slums, the lack of any sanitation. I remember sitting and watching a young child die in front of me, a baby. It was just like utterly overwhelming. And I could see no hope in it and nothing good. But I had to stay these 3.5 weeks. And the strange thing is, as I stayed that length of time, this will sound a weird thing to say to you, but I began to see the beauty in it all, in India, beyond the pain, not to be dismissive of it. But my first week there, I just couldn't wait to get out because I thought there's nothing good in this place. And yet, as I stayed, I learned that there was a happiness and a joy in these people living in circumstances that no one in the UK could ever contemplate. There was a joy in it for them and a richness and a depth of life. And it wasn't naivety. It was a depth of understanding of life. And of course, all these years later, out of that, we began work in India. And all these years later, we have, lots of work across India. And so I've been there many, many times. And every time it impresses me that the joy isn't a kind of denial of reality. No. It's a joy in the reality.
Absolutely. Yeah.
An extraordinary thing, eh?
Yeah.
What I was going to do earlier was I was going to quote Jesus, because for me, he was dying on the cross and he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? What a cry of desolation. What a cry of utter hopelessness and despair and pain. And slowly, I knew that saying, from a kid, I suppose I heard it said. I slowly realized what I guess others had known all along, and what Jesus clearly knew. It's the first stanza, it's the first verse, it's the first line or two from Psalm 22, which Jesus would have grown up with, like all Jews, and known off by heart. And it's almost like in that moment of pain as he hangs on this cross, having contemplated much earlier when he was out in the desert, I'm taking on all this stuff, but I'm going to do it anyway, and setting his face to do it. Then he hangs on the cross, executed by the Romans and betrayed by his own people. And he's hanging there and he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? But he's actually quoting this Psalm of Lament. It's one of the greatest Psalms of Lament in the Bible. Why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? So far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest. And the psalm goes on. But as it goes on, you discover that this psalm almost it turns a corner because halfway through, but you, O Lord, do not be far from me. You are my strength. Come quickly to help me, deliver me. And then it goes on, I will declare your name to the people and to the assembly of the people. And it goes on, and I will praise you, and the poor will be satisfied, and the ends of the earth will remember you. That all the rich of the earth will feast on you and worship you. And then it ends with this wonderful verse at the end, and they will proclaim your righteousness, declaring to all the people as yet unborn, he has done it. So it's almost like in his agony, Jesus reminds himself of this psalm that he's learned as a child. And he's saying, I'm here, and yet, but even there is more. And I've always found that, since I understood it, inspiring, because my wife, it drives her mad sometimes, but I think I'm that kind of, but, and yet, and even, and we could do this.
Let's get to the other side of it. Yeah.
There's been a bit of a tension in our marriage from time to time, because when we first married, she told me about what was wrong about, the house or the car or our holiday or the kids. And I was like, and so I thought she was asking me to do something about it. And it used to drive her mad that I came up with all these ideas. And I slowly learned she needs to sit in that. I'm not so much of a sitter in it. I'm more of an ideas person. We're different.
Yeah. And that's good. I was just thinking, I remember driving down the M23 back from Brighton to London. And I think U2 were doing a gig, and it was being played live on Radio 2. So this is a while ago, and they were playing at Twickenham. And I heard the music start, and it was 40. So they were doing their Psalm 40.
Yeah.
You know, how long to sing this song.
Yeah.
And then there's that shift.
Yeah.
I'll sing a new song.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful. I was crying driving down the M23 home. But it's that thing that you've just said. There's this moment, isn't there, where lament turns. But you got to go through that to experience the turn.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no turn.
No, absolutely. But that draws me back. Why did I talk about the front-facing camera being put on an iPhone? It seems such a trivial thing to talk about. Or when Meta bought Instagram 2 years later and put the like button in, those two things, I mean, the internet is wonderful, isn't it? It supplies us with information, employment, opportunities, loads of people with love.
All those marriages,
all of those wonderful things. But it can be so destructive as well, and has been so destructive. And so there are so many people who never get to say, I will sing a new song. They get stuck and they get lost. And they're young.
Yeah. So that's our work, right? Is to help one another, find the way through lament.
That's our work. That's what we've got to do. Even you saying that inspires me. I can't help it. I kind of think, yeah, let's do it.
Thank you, Steve.